So for the next hour or so, we're going to do this sort of state of the state session with Christine Ellsworth from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Jay Hawkins from Feeding New York, and Stephanie Wu Winters from No Kid Hungry New York. And our goal for this session really is to better understand the lay of the land around food rescue, policy, and food insecurity in New York. So how this session will run is that we'll have these three speakers present. We're going to do one right after another, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. So please feel free to use the chat box for your questions as you're thinking of them. I know there's going to be a lot of information presented in a back-to-back fashion. Avery will be monitoring that area, and she can help highlight any of the chat box happenings during the Q&A time. All right, so without further ado, we are honored to start things off by introducing Christine Ellsworth. Good to see you this morning, Christine. Christine works for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Organics Reduction and Recycling section. This section works to prevent and divert organics from disposal to beneficial uses and focuses on four main pillars: regulatory oversight of organics recycling facilities, legislative advocacy and implementation, funding program development, and then outreach and education. So Christine's team has been tasked with overseeing the implementation of the New York Food Donation and Food Scraps Recycling Law. And during this presentation, Christine will be speaking about what they saw during the first year of implementation of the law in 2022 and the valuable role that DEC's partners have played. All right, Christine, all you, my friend.
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to everyone for having me. We can go to the next slide. So yeah, I'm really here today to just kind of chat about how we're rethinking food waste in New York State, recognizing that food waste isn't food that is just inedible and can go to composting or another type of recycling, but there's this large chunk of food that's being thrown away that is, edible, and we're trying to get diverted into the donation landscape. So we can do next slide. So as was mentioned, I work for DEC in the Organics Reduction and Recycling section. Just kind of some greater context on what we do. The section itself started about 8 to 10 years ago, and we're housed within our Division of Materials Management here at DEC, which actually oversees all of the garbage in the state, recycling, and then also composting. And so the section itself originally really started out as a regulatory arm to regulate our composting facilities across the state. These are large-scale facilities that are handling a lot of different organic materials, such as food waste, yard waste, biosolids, food processing waste, et cetera. And so, yeah, the core of our work is to make sure that those facilities are operating correctly, and we also provide technical assistance to those types of facilities. As there started to be this shift in focus onto food waste, our focus as a group started to expand quite broadly. So now we look a lot further just beyond that composting of food waste and other materials. And so we've gotten into policy and legislative advocacy. As was mentioned, our group was tasked with implementing the New York State Food Donation and Food Scraps Recycling Law, which I'll be talking about today. We started having funding directly provided to our program to make specialized grant programs. And then we also do a lot of outreach and education on composting, wasted food reduction, food donation, et cetera. And so there are 5 of us that are housed out of our central office in Albany, but we have regional staff across the state in our regional offices. And those are the folks who are actually going out and doing the inspections on businesses and institutions that are required to comply with the Food Donation and Food Scraps Recycling Law, and they also deal with any public complaints with our facilities that we oversee. Next slide. So today I'm really here to talk about the Food Donation and Food Scraps Recycling Law. If you have any other questions about composting or organics recycling, happy to chat about those at another time, but today we're really going to be focusing on the law itself. And just so we're all on the same page, businesses and institutions that generate an annual average of 2 tons of wasted food per week or more must donate excess edible food to the maximum extent practicable and recycle all remaining food scraps if they're within 25 miles of an organics recycler. So when I say an organics recycler, once again, I'm kind of going back to a composting facility, anaerobic digester, any type of technology that can recycle those food scraps. And so there are some exclusions under this law, and I have those listed there: hospitals, nursing homes, adult care facilities, K through 12 schools, New York City because they have their own local law, and then there's a unique scenario in Delaware County. And so the law itself, the language of the law and the exclusions identified in the law, that was all written and identified by legislature and not by DEC. So a little bit later on, I'll kind of talk about what it means to amend the law and potentially start working in some of these exclusions. And so this law passed in 2019 and became effective January 1st of 2022. So January 1, 2022 to December 31 of 2022 was the first full year of implementation. And from 2019 to 2022, our group worked really hard to just prepare for the law, make guidance documents. We started forming a food donation working group, which had food banks and some other feeding program representatives, the New York State Department of Health, New York State Department of Agriculture. We're very comfortable with the recycling portion of the law, but the food donation side of things, we've really put the time and effort in to learn from others who are in that space. And that is a space that we continue to learn and are always looking for more feedback as we work through implementing this law. Next slide. So looking at the law kind of by the numbers, so every year under the law, we are required to publish a list of all of the businesses and institutions across the state that have to comply with this law. And examples of those that have to comply are colleges, grocery stores, super centers like a Costco or Walmart, restaurant, hospitality industry. And so we have lots of data that we're always kind of cycling through, looking to identify this law. And every year, 6 months prior to implementation of the new year, we have to publish that list. So for example, year 2022, we published the list June 1st of 2021. Within that following 6 months, businesses have the opportunity to work with us to identify that maybe they don't actually meet the requirements of the law, so maybe they generate under that 2 tons per week. They also have a chance to submit a waiver. There's 5 to 6 different waiver justifications that they can submit for to get a 1-year waiver from the law. So as you can see, the number of businesses over the 2022 to 2024 has increased slightly. This count is always in somewhat of a flux because we're always working with businesses to identify whether or not they should be on this law. The first year, when we first published the list, we were actually over that 1,000 count. But we ended up taking a bunch of businesses off because we realized the method that we were using to identify them, it was a little off, and that is just something that we're always kind of tweaking to move forward. And then from there on out, we continue to identify new businesses. Some business chains actually identified that we were missing certain stores within their locations in New York State, so those were added. That was nice that they were kind of self-identifying to us. So as you can see, all of them are required to donate, and then a portion of them are required to recycle. And that's based on if they're within 25 miles of a food scraps recycling facility, as well as an additional assessment that we do on our end to make sure that that recycling facility has the excess capacity to accept all of those food scraps from these businesses. And I do want to note, some of these businesses already had robust donation programs and food scraps recycling programs. And so, they were already doing the thing, so they didn't have to really add anything once the law passed. But we are actively working with a lot of businesses to make sure that they understand the law. And I'll get into some technical assistance programs that we have available to also assist them with complying. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there's 5 to 6 different waiver justifications that folks can submit for. And so when we were looking at 2022, we review all of the information that comes in. They have to submit paperwork and justification that goes with that waiver petition. We only approved 29 waivers, and so 26 of them were really related to cost. So there's a waiver justification that says that if the difference is greater than 10% in cost, that they can get out of complying with the law. And so often, as you can see from the waiver count, more often than not, that is the justification that folks are applying for. And that really is on the food scraps recycling side of things. It's taking a bit longer for the food scraps recycling network to catch up, for them to find a hauler to work with. So all of these waivers, as you can see, none of them have been requested to get out of the donation aspects from the law. The donation landscape across the state is really robust, and there's more often than not a partner in the area that they can work with. And if you remember, in the law, it said that folks have to donate to the maximum extent practicable. So kind of going back on that gives a little bit of wiggle room to a business or generation, and for also the food donation partner that they're working with, to identify what items should actually be moving over to the feeding program. And so if there's a feeding program that says, you know, we're not looking to take your dessert, your candy, those types of items, the grocery store, for example, doesn't have to donate those items because their feeding partner is not willing to accept them. And so that's donating to the maximum extent practicable. In 2023, we approved even less waivers, so we only had 11 of those. Once again, 10 of them were related to cost, and one of them was just a unique scenario that had happened. And so for the 2024 coming up, that list is currently published of who has to comply with that law. And we're currently in the waiver petition submittal time period. And so those waivers are actually due soon. And so we will review all of those and we will republish the 2024 list early December. Next slide, please. So looking at our first year of implementation, so as a reminder, that was January 1 to December 31 of 2022. Donation, as anticipated, was a great success. As I had mentioned, and as you all know, there's a very robust donation landscape in New York State. So there's a lot of partners to partner with. We'll kind of get into the work that Feeding New York State is doing, and Jay will be presenting after me. The food banks all the way down to the smaller feeding programs. There's just a really great network of things happening. Food scraps recycling, also as anticipated, is going to take some time to grow. There's a bit more logistics with the haulers and where the facilities are located. But once again, a lot of work is being done to get businesses online to start complying with that portion of the law. We are actively doing inspections at businesses and institutions across the state. As I mentioned, these are being done by our regional DEC staff. And so they are spot inspections. We're not inspecting every single entity every single year. But yeah, we are doing random spot inspections across every region of the state. Right now, we are taking more of an active outreach and education approach. If we do find a business isn't complying with the law that should be, we really want to make sure that they understand the requirements under the law, and just really do our due diligence in that outreach and education. And if we have to take further enforcement action, we have the protocols in place to do so. As I mentioned, we're consistently fine-tuning and assessing our DFSG list, both the methodology to identify businesses that have to comply, as well as working with businesses if they, provide information to us and actually don't need to be on the list. And so under the law, every single year, DEC has to publish a report to the governor and to the legislature that gives an overview of implementation of the law from the previous year. So we do have our 2022 report is available on our DEC website, which I can put a link in the chat after I'm done presenting here. But yeah, this is a great way for us to be really transparent in how the law is playing out. We're looking to provide in this coming year, so for 2023, we'll be publishing that in that December, January timeframe. We'll be publishing all of the data that came out of the annual reports from the DFSGs from this past year. So yeah, once again, it's really just time for us to be transparent on how everything with the law is going. Next slide. So the businesses and institutions that are required to comply with the law, under the law, they have to submit an annual report to us every year by March 1st of the following year. So for 2022, everyone had to submit an online annual report to us by March 1st of 2023. And so I just pulled out what the food donation aspect of this annual report looks like. But really, we're looking to just get an overview from them of their donation practices. So you can see we have a total of food donated in that year, listing out who their donation partners were. And instead of doing quantifying how much food per, category of food, we decided just to have them mark the types of food that they are donating. And we came up with this list and the language that was used in this list based on the work from our food donation working group that we had developed. And so for this first 2022 annual report, we also asked them to optionally provide data from 2021. We were hoping to get a little bit of a baseline to see, if the law had an impact on their donation efforts. And so I have some preliminary data that I can share on the next slide. But we also have them do this for the food scraps recycling aspect of the law. And then, you know, businesses can also indicate, there's some free-form questions at the end. They can indicate, you know, what major food donation challenges have they had? What major food scraps recycling challenges have they had? Have there been any general operational issues that they would like to make us aware of? And so that's space for them really just to give us more information. And that's also information that we'll be publishing in the governor's report. Next slide, please. So these are just some preliminary findings from the 2022 annual reports that we received. Of the 874 businesses that were required to report, 629 of them did. So that's about a 72% reporting rate, which was honestly much higher than we anticipated for this first year. This first year of the law, we don't have emails for anyone. And so we're really relying on just general outreach that we're putting out there, letters that we're emailing to all of these locations. And as you can anticipate with a store, who knows where that letter is ending up with. So kind of constantly sending emails, or I'm sorry, not emails, constantly sending letters, working with restaurant associations, associations that represent the grocery stores, et cetera. That's just how we're trying to get that outreach out there. So we're anticipating this reporting rate is only going to increase every year. Right now, we're saying that the food donation increased by 60% from 2021 to 2022. It's important to note that not everyone who reported data for 2022 also reported that data for 2021. So I would take that stat with a grain of salt here. So 552 businesses and, 552 businesses and institutions that were required to comply with the law, those that submitted data, they had said that they donate 20,147 tons in 2022. And in 2021, only a portion of them provided data for that, and it was down to about 12.5 tons. So as you can see, the 552 that reported data for donation in 2022 compared to the 629 that submitted an annual report, there's obviously a portion of those businesses that don't have donation programs in place, and that's what they're telling us. So there's still plenty of work to do to get those folks having donation programs put in place. I'm sure there's a variety of reasons for why they don't, but that's, you know, now we know the businesses that don't have them, and working with our partners at Feeding New York State, we can kind of directly support them with the free technical assistance to get donation programs up and going. Yeah, and then as you can see in the 2021, as I said, take those numbers lightly, since obviously there's a good chunk of folks who didn't provide data, and those are still kind of statistics that we're working through before we publish those in the governor's report. And so as you can kind of probably anticipate, the grocery sector, supermarkets, wholesale and distribution, they're reporting the highest donation quantities, which I think makes sense because they're moving the most products through their store locations. And then many of the businesses and institutions that reported are reporting multiple donation partners, which I think is also to be expected. And so any of our final learnings are going to be published, as I mentioned, in our 2023 annual report to the governor and legislature. Next slide. So we've had a wonderful partnership with Feeding New York State. We take great pride in developing really strong partners with folks. We want to be accessible and transparent and really work with folks as we work through implementing this law. And so through Feeding New York State, we have a contract with them. So we're funding them to do this work on our behalf. They've set up a call center, and Jay will go over more of the details of exactly what they're doing. This is just a brief highlight. And so the call center, or anyone that they're connected with, they can help them businesses set up donation programs. They can help them find food donation partners, and they can also help them understand any of the food safety practices when donating. That's another really important aspect to us, and I know that's an important aspect when we're working with Department of Health and Department of Agriculture, who are regulating these entities. And a clarification point, when we're going in for inspections, the New York State Department of Health and New York State Department of Ag are still the ones who are making sure that any donations are meeting food safety standards. When we do our inspections, we're just making sure that the donation aspect is happening. So Feeding New York State has been really wonderful in onboarding new businesses that are required to donate, and also working with businesses who already have donation programs, but teaching them how to expand their existing donation habits. And maybe there's been some misunderstandings about what can and cannot be donated, and so they've been great in that. And so through that funding with that program, they've already worked on donating over 40 million pounds with the stores that they've been working with. So every month that value that they're redirecting is getting higher and higher. So we're really proud of that work with them. Next slide. So putting money where our mouth is in anticipation of the law coming to place, we also have been able to put grant funding towards supporting donation across New York State. So through Feeding New York State, we've been able to give $800,000, and they've distributed that to the 10 regional food banks for outreach and education. We gave $1.5 million during COVID to help with the movement of dairy and produce. I spelled dairy wrong there. And most recently, we gave $2 million for equipment to enhance agency-enabled pickup at the 10 regional food banks. So they're helping to distribute that money to the food banks. We also realized that if we're giving money to the food banks, it might not be trickling down to the emergency food relief organizations. So a couple of years back, we had distributed $1.1 million to 84 nonprofits to help capture additional food that they could distribute in their communities. And most recently, with this grant period just closed, but we are giving out $1.75 million for local emergency food relief equipment. So this grant program is more focused towards purchasing vehicles, staffing drivers, refrigerators, freezers, that type of equipment. Next slide, please. So another contract that we have that is available for businesses to take advantage of if you're working with any entities that are under the law or actually outside of the law is our Rethink Food Waste New York program, which is with the Center for Ecotechnology. And so once again, this is free technical assistance to businesses and institutions, both under the law and outside of the law. They work hand in hand with Feeding New York State on both the food donation and the food scraps recycling side. So partnering businesses with both of these contracts together, a business should have every resource they need to get these programs off the ground. And then this program also offers free technical assistance to organics recyclers. They have composting consultants on hand. Next slide, please. And so I think this is my last slide. What does it mean? Oftentimes we get questions on what it means to expand or amend the food donation and food scraps recycling law. And so what that would mean is that 2 tons per week would actually be brought down. So maybe we would take a tiered approach like Vermont. So it would go from 2 tons, maybe down to 1 ton in 2 years. After 2 years, maybe it would go down to a ½ ton per week. And so the number of businesses that would be required to comply would continue to grow. Vermont actually goes all the way down to the residential level, so that is also an option. We would love to see the 25 miles to food scraps recycler requirement eliminated, which would be wonderful, and it would just open up the opportunities for more folks to be able to recycle their food scraps. And then also looking to include some of those exclusions, such as the hospitals, adult care facilities, K through 12 schools. And so this is public information. It's recommended by some state plans, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, their scoping plan, as well as our draft New York State Solid Waste Management Plan. And so last year we saw some legislation that did speak to expanding the law. It didn't pass, but we are anticipating that some of that legislation will likely be presented again. So we'll see what happens with that. Most of that, actually all of it, is outside of DEC's hands. And once again, that really is based out of the legislature. But our DEC legal team works closely with them, as that kind of moves through legislature. Next slide, please. So that's the end of my presentation. I know I kind of zipped through a lot of stuff, but happy to discuss any more of this and answer any questions at the end of the session.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was wonderful, very detailed. I know I personally have a few questions, so we'll definitely circle back to that. And I just want to welcome anybody that might have come in during Christine's talk. So just so you know, everything's being recorded. So if you missed something that you felt like, oh, I really wanted to hear that, we'll be sending out the recording at the end of the conference. And next up, we're going to have Jay Hawkins from Feeding New York State. So Feeding New York State has a mission to lead a unified effort for hunger-free New York State and partners with the DEC to implement the New York food donation and food scraps recycling law. Jay Hawkins is the food rescue manager at Feeding New York State, and he will highlight how the law impacted food rescue and food recovery efforts and how you, the attendees of the conference, can help. So we welcome Jay Hawkins. Let's see if we can get him pinned. Anna, can we get Jay pinned? Excuse me, spotlighted. We'll take Christine off. Always some tech stuff going on, right? And while we're waiting, Avery, would you pop in our morning agenda as well back into the chat for those who are newly joined? Again, we welcome you. We're so happy you're here. And thank you so much for bearing with us while we figure out some tech things here.
Hey Jay, if you're on, would you mind turning your camera on?
It is on.
There you are. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you this morning, Jay.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, my friend, all you.
So just a quick thank you to Seven Valleys Health Coalition and Gabriel for hosting this morning. Can we go to the next slide? So Gabriel mentioned it briefly, but with the New York Food Donation and Food Scraps Law, we were able to create a food recovery program at Feeding New York State. So we're going to be talking a lot about that today. But nothing happens, with this program or anything else without funding. So, just thank you to the DEC and Feeding America for initially funding this project. And the DEC also has invested some more funding. And we'll kind of chat about what we're doing with that funding as well. I think you guys will be interested in that. Next slide, please. So brief overview of Feeding New York State and what we do. On the agenda today, we'll chat briefly about the law. Christine handled a lot of that. And then we'll talk about what we're doing with the food recovery program, some of the results that we've had, and then what we've learned from implementing this program and working with our network. So next slide, please. So we mentioned a unified effort. So as you can see, we have 10 food banks that are regional, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this slide or familiar with the food banks. Those food banks are in 8 service areas. Long Island shares 2 food banks, and then New York City shares 2 food banks as well. Those 10 food banks have 5,000 member agencies that are part of their network. So pantries, food rescue organizations, shelters, and then obviously some of you guys that are on the call, not necessarily part of the food bank network, but still doing the work. We have in New York 2.5 million people right now that are food insecure out of 20 million New Yorkers. So that's a large number, and that just keeps growing. And with that number growing, we're growing as an organization as well. As you can see here, we've grown 10 times our size since 2019. We've added some more people to our advocacy group. We've added some people to help out with some other grants around dairy. And then, we've also added a member services, our member engagement manager, and her role is to partner with all the food banks and the departments we're not working with as much as we could and bring them together so that we're more efficient as a group. Next slide, please. So this is our team at Feeding New York State, minus a few people, but myself on the left, and our advocacy manager, Ryan Healy, is right next to me. And then our grants research director, Kathleen Stress, is next to Ryan. And then as we move right, we have in the middle, Dan Egan's our executive director. And then we have Jim Germain, who is our director of produce for statewide. He works with the farms. And then Jim's got his arm around Kelly Regan, who is our office administrator, does a lot of the financial things that we need to have done, and works with a lot of the grants to make sure we're on track. And then our administrative assistant, who helps me a lot with the data that we'll be going over today, Beth Barlow, is all the way on the end to the right. Next slide. So we had every year, Feeding New York State has an annual summit. This year we were lucky enough to be joined by some folks from the DEC, missing a couple, but you'll see me there on the left. And then we have Molly Tremblay, that's Chris Glander right there. And then Christine, who just spoke, is all the way on the end. It was at City Harvest, one of our food banks down in the city, and it was really great. This year we're going to move back up to Albany, but I wanted to share some pictures with you guys. So next slide. So New York State food donation and food scraps recycling law. So we're going to get into the donation landscape a little bit here. So we know, and I'm sure you guys have seen this number quite a bit, 7.8 billion pounds of food is wasted per year in New York State, right? So that's the same as about 17,000 Statue of Liberties, right? So it's a lot of food that's being wasted. You know, what comes with that? So pressure on the environment. There's a lot of business expenses, you know, for waste disposal, but also what comes with it is an opportunity for food banks to get more donations and work with some of these designated food scrap generators on the DEC list to really get the food back to the community and get it out of the landfills. Next slide, please. So this is me right here. So I work with, like I said, throughout the state. So I'm always traveling. My main focus is to create new donor relationships, get new donors in the door, and then assist the food banks any way we can. So sometimes that's managing data, you know, helping them make sure the pounds are being reported correctly. And that's really important because, you know, if we're reporting the pounds correctly, that can lead to more funding. And then we do a lot of consultation around different strategies and how we're going to approach donors or approach projects that we're working on. And then we've also been assisting them with hiring retail coordinators. They're really investing a lot in food recovery retail coordinators right now so that they can work with the partner agencies, they can work with the donors, they can bring them together, and we can start picking up from a lot of these donors that we're not picking up from right now. So it's really important that we have the right people doing this work at the food banks. And so we've been helping a lot with that as well. Next slide. So our results so far. So really a lot of this data is from October 21. And I know you guys know the law went into effect in January of 2022, but a lot of this data is from October 21 to August 2023. We don't have all the September data just yet, so we didn't report on a lot of September data, but I think we had about half the reporting in and we went over 5 million pounds. So that equates to 171 new donors. And so we're always concerned about cost per pound. So we're at about 11 cents a pound right now at Feeding New York State. We didn't measure the cost at the food banks just yet, but the donors that we help the food banks acquire were at about 11 cents per pound, which is really good. Next slide. So this is active versus non-active donors. So our active donors are donors that we're currently getting pounds from. 75% of them are new donors. Some of them are donors where they, you know, let's say we go into Walmart or Costco and they're not donating any produce, or they're donating, let's say the average Walmart, for instance, donating 20,000 pounds a month, but they're only donating 2,000 pounds a month. So we partner with a food bank, and either we'll go in with the food bank or I'll go in and I'll do a training class with them. And then we'll see the pounds increase tremendously. So a lot of it's training and education. So an active donor to us, you know, like I said, 75% of them are new, but some of them were donors that the food banks were already partnered with. They just weren't getting the most out of the partnership. And then non-active donors are donors that are ready to donate that just aren't donating yet because we do not have the capacity at the food bank, or we haven't been able to partner them with an agency just yet. So non-active donors, and I know you guys for the most part, because we chatted about it a little bit, are aware of some of the new donors that we have, and I'll give you some background in this. So Tops right now, they have 130 stores. We are only picking up from about 25% of those stores. And so we still have the opportunity to capture, you know, where it's a little over 80 stores where we can capture all of the categories now, right now, not just bread. Prior, Tops was just donating bread. I got an opportunity to sit down with the corporate team and convince them to donate every category. And so now we have to start closing the loop and picking up from these stores we're not picking up from. And so the food banks are partnering with a lot of their agencies right now and enabling them, getting them the supplies that they need to do the pickups and make sure that they're tracking the pounds. And then we've also invested in drivers at the food bank level. We've invested in trucks for agencies. So we're doing a lot of work right now to start picking up from these locations. And that's just Tops. You know, we have another chain that's Long Island based called King Cullen. And I know some of you might be familiar with it, but they just started donating too when the law came into effect. And they had 35 stores in their chain. And right now we're only picking up from 20. So we still have that gap of 15 where they're ready to donate. They're just kind of waiting for us to have the capacity to move forward. And we're doing that with the funding that we're getting. We're able to start putting projects together to do some of this. But this is, as you can see, the amount of donors that are active and the amount of donors that are non-active, you know, just keep going up. So we have a lot of work to do. We're adding donors just as fast as the food bank can pick up from them. So now it's okay, let's make sure we're partnering these donors and let's make sure we're doing pickup. So right now we're putting action plans together and projects to start doing some of that work. So next slide. So a little bit of detail to the data. And I believe, so sorry, Gabriel, this is the old slide, but no big deal. We can still use this. So in 2022, the total organizations that were subject to the law initially were 1,428. As Christine mentioned, after they pulled some of the waivers out and some of the wholesalers and distributors, the number went down to 874. So of those 874 organizations that were subject to law, the donors that were acquired by the food banks that the food banks were working with already were 160. So the food banks were already working with 160 of those 874 donors. And I think that number, I'm not sure what the percentage would be now, but it's a little higher, obviously. And then we were able to help the food banks add 171 donors. So, like I said, most of them new donors, a lot of work still to do, a lot of donors still to add. But we ended up having the remaining donors, I believe it, after all said and done, it was like 543 that were left, where we have not worked with them yet. We haven't been able to reach out to them. We're working on it. A lot of the outreach that we do is in person. So we're doing, doing visits in person because it's just more successful that way versus trying to pick up the phone. And a lot of times when you pick up the phone and try to call a donor, as you guys know, a lot of these stores are really busy, or the wholesalers are really busy. So it's easier just to go and do an in-person visit. So we have about 543 that we have to reach out to still. And a lot of them are wholesalers and distributors. So really the focus this year is to dive into the wholesalers and distributors with the food banks and see which ones make the most sense for them to work with, and start diving into that category instead of the grocery and retail category. We're doing a really good job in that category right now. I think we've added 90% of the ones that are obligated to donate under the law. So now we're really focusing on moving into the next category. So next slide, please. So as you can see, we got a little bit of a head start. The law went into effect in January of 22, but our first month doing this, we had less than 50,000 pounds that we were able to acquire, and that was just from probably 4 or 5 donors. And now, all the way up until our most recent month of August 23, we're well over 400,000 pounds. So the last 4 months, we're averaging over 350,000 pounds of food that we're able to get to the food banks, and they're able to get to the community that they serve, whether it be partner agencies, whether it be shelters, food rescue organizations. So we're getting the food where it needs to go, but there's more food that we can get, and we're cognizant of that, and we're currently working on that now. So next slide. So some of the secondary results from the work that we've been doing. So we've had CO2 reduction of about 13.5 million pounds, so equivalent to almost 1,500 cars off the road for 1 year. The network between the food banks have been tremendous. We've improved networking so much, especially with our annual summits. But now our food banks are talking. They're doing, they're working together on projects. They're using each other for ideas, bouncing information off each other. So not that it wasn't happening before, but we were able to bring them together. And I think, having in-person meetings, especially after COVID, having in-person meetings and making sure that everybody knows each other has made us a lot more efficient. So as you can see, over 4 million pounds of food donated. This was in August of 23. So as I mentioned, that's well over 5 million now. We've improved our data quality. So what that means is, we were getting data before reported back to us, and I say us, but the food banks, and it was incomplete. So the agencies were reporting back, and sometimes they were reporting a couple times a month, and then they wouldn't report what they picked up the other 2 weeks. And so now with Meal Connect, which is an app through Feeding America that a lot of the food banks are using with the agencies to make it a lot easier for the agencies to report pounds, with that and the added staff at the food banks doing the work and following up with the agencies, we're really seeing an increase in data quality and in the amount of pounds that are coming in. And then the food recovery program itself, we're starting to do some work with some of our larger generators, our food scrap generators that are on the list, specifically grocery stores. We're starting to do some advocacy work with them, and getting them to help support some of our efforts on that side. So a lot of great secondary results as well. Next slide. So some of the lessons learned. So a lot of the letters that the DEC sent out as we were doing these initial visits, we realized that a lot of the stores were saying that they weren't getting the letters. They didn't know about the law. So we decided, all right, maybe they weren't getting the letters. Let's try to send some postcards out. We did that. Then they said they weren't getting the postcards, right? So that was not that effective either. And that's why I went back to, in-person visits. I think, as many of these designated food scrap generators as we can visit, the better. That's how we're getting the donors now. And a lot of it is just, me being in the car, traveling, doing a lot of visits, enlisting the donors, training them, and then, because the food safety is such concerning, educating them on, the Good Samaritan Bill Emerson Act, and just making sure they know that there's no liability for them if they're donating in good faith. And so that's been really effective. We've also shared some videos on social media. I think it's really effective for our program. Not as many people see them as I would like. It's really effective for our advocacy program, but I think for us, the videos are great, but as I talk about them to some people, they don't always get to see them. So you guys feel free to check us out on social media and share with your colleagues. That we have a lot of good things on there, and education about the law, education about some other things, and just kind of updates on what we're doing and how you could potentially get involved. So initially, the donor hotline And so our call center that we had initially for donors, I think the first year we struggled with it, but after the first year, as of late, it's been a little more effective. So we were able to partner with a couple donors now. And I think altogether we've added about 15 donors from the call center. We had a call from the sustainability manager at Grand Union, and they have 11 stores. And we got the call from her, and I started partnering her with some of our food banks. And I believe they only had 2 stores that were on the list of, as having to donate, but now we're working on, developing relationships with all 11 stores and partnering them with agencies that are members of the food bank. So the hotline has increased and picked up and been a lot more effective for us. So, and you guys, so at the bottom right here, you'll see this is during the COVID times, but you'll see a picture of myself and you guys might know Pete, but Pete Ricardo from Central New York Food Bank. This is right in their lobby over there. So Pete's a great partner at Central New York Food Bank. Next slide. So some more lessons learned. So I think operationally what we've learned is, and this is, I think, across the country, but driver retention has been difficult, and that also translates to food banking and our member agencies. So if we're short a driver, we're missing pickups. So driver retention is really important to us. We try to maintain constant communication with our donor partners to let them know, like, hey, we're short a couple of drivers, we're not going to make the pickup today. And we do that, I would say probably 100% of the time. There's not a lot of times when the food bank themselves are supposed to do a pickup where they don't let the donor know. Now, member agencies, sometimes with them not being as staffed as a food bank, sometimes they, if they're having issues and they don't have someone that can make a pickup that day, sometimes, the donor doesn't know. And so that's something we're also working on with our member agencies, and just trying to maintain that constant communication with the donor. Our retail donors, so according to the NLRB, we're at about 70% annually of turnover. So, I believe within the first 3 months, it's at like 50%. Somebody starts, with a retail donor and then they're gone. And so a lot of what we're doing is retraining the same donors and partnering with them to make sure they have what they need, and that if they have a new team, that we're helping them, train them as much as we can, so we're getting the right product, we're getting the right food. So it's just an ongoing battle and an ongoing program for us to make sure they're supported as much as they can, just because of the high turnover rate at retail donors. We can plan as much as we want, but it's really hard to execute sometimes, and we get that. So we also have a lot of different food banks. So every food bank set up different. Every food bank has different capacity. Every food bank has a different amount of space where they can store frozen items, cold storage. So we have to keep that in mind when we're planning. And then, when we're executing, we just need to make sure that we're continuing that conversation and constant communication with not only the food bank, but the donor, especially if the donor thinks that the food bank has space for some of the food that they have to donate, but the food bank doesn't have space. We have to be able to be really lenient and just be able to move it quick. If it can't go to one food bank, can it go to an agency, or can it go to another food bank? So that's really important. And then I think we went over this when we talked about the non-active and active donors, but right now our donor enlistment is outpacing our ability to pick up. So, we're adding donors faster than we can pick up from the ones that are already enlisted. So, like I said, we got some projects now that we're working on, and we have some funding where this is, we're starting to catch back up, but this is something that's been an issue for us. And we know that a typical partner agency, a food pantry, they can't do the work unassisted. And that's why we're trying to enable the agencies, give them supplies, whether it's thermal blankets, whether it's digital thermometers, digital scales, making sure that they have that, or maybe it's that they need a vehicle, and so we're also helping our food banks invest in their partner agencies and get vehicles as well. Next slide. So data management. So, when we're talking about here is really just tracking pounds. And I think for us, it's important because we want to know who's reporting their pounds, who isn't, how can we improve that, but also who are our larger donors, who are the donors that are struggling, that aren't donating as much as they potentially could. And we can see all that if we're tracking the data, and we're able to go to the donor and say, hey, you guys are, the other stores under the same banner, when we just had this conversation with a Costco, the other stores under the same banner are donating 40,000 pounds a month, you're donating 5,000. How can we close the gap? And we only know that if we're measuring and tracking the pounds. Also important, like I mentioned, for future funding, for us, to get funding to help the food banks and our member agencies, we need to track this. We need to be able to track this and understand the bigger picture. So it's really important. And I mentioned this before, but Meal Connect it just makes it so easy for us to track the pounds, and it's an app. It's easier than writing it down on a piece of paper and then taking that piece of paper and reporting the pounds through an email to to whoever's handling the retail donations at the food bank. In Meal Connect, you just enter them, they can see them, and you can do it every time you do a pickup, and it's quick, it's seamless. So it might not be happening as much as we would like it to. The food banks are trying to get 100% reporting, but I think it's a lot lower than that right now. But one of the things we're able to do with Meal Connect is we're able to say, all right, well, we know that they were supposed to do a pickup this week. They didn't report the pounds, or they're supposed to do 3 this week. They didn't report any pounds. They only reported pounds for the final 3 weeks of the month, and we can see where the gaps are and just reach out to the agency that we're working with and say, hey, do you mind sending us the data for, the first week of the month? And so this works really well for us. And we're still really trying to get this down, but we're doing a better job at it. Next slide. So some actions that are underway that we're working on right now. So this is really great. We're working on creating training videos for agencies that work with food banks. And so how do you do a proper pickup? The food safety aspect of the pickup. And then, how do you report the pounds? So we're working on a few separate videos, and we're also partnering with one of our local high schools in Albany to do this. And we have some kids from the drama club that are going to be in the videos, but we're creating these videos. And as soon as they're done, we're going to get them to the food bank so they can get them out to the member agencies, so that it can help the food banks with training the partner agencies that they're working with. That way, when before they even go into a donor, they have all the tools they need to be successful. And then as far as funding project goes, so I mentioned some additional funding that we got from the DEC. So our goal with this funding was to initially, with at least the first projects that we're funding, is keep the cost below 50 cents a pound, and then try to figure out how we can increase the amount of pounds we're picking up at retail locations, whether that be through enabling agencies, getting them vehicles, getting drivers for food banks, you know, getting them more drivers to do the pickups with their own vehicles. You know, that's what we're working on. So we've funded 9 separate projects at 9 different regional food banks. I believe only one didn't submit a proposal for a project at this time. I think they will, but and some of them, like I said, they're getting, you know, an agency, a vehicle. Some of them are you know, funding their own, you know, their own team so that they can add drivers. So a lot of good things. We've already seen an increase in pounds from this. We haven't pulled that data apart yet. I think that'll be coming in the next month or so, just so we can start analyzing how effective it's been. And then our goal for fiscal year 24 is 6 million pounds. So up at 2 million from last fiscal year, our last fiscal year goal, but our new goal is 6 million pounds this fiscal year. So we have a lot of work to do, and as you can see, we're doing it. And I think with the help of, you know, the food banks, their member agencies, and everyone on the call, I think that the 6 million pounds is definitely doable. So next slide. And then I wanted to share this with you guys. So this is the whole sourcing team. We also have some folks from Feeding America and some folks from DEC, as well as from our partners at Center for Ecotechnology that attended as well. But this is the sourcing team from all 10 of our food banks that are doing the work every day and partnering with the agencies. And I think this is a great way just to end my portion. So that, I believe I got, can you go to the next slide? And that is it.
Thank you, Jay. We really appreciate that overview. All right, we're going to move up into our next, last but definitely not least, presenter, and that is Stephanie Wu Winter. So I'll let Anna get Stephanie spotlighted as I introduce her. So Stephanie is from No Kid Hungry New York, which is a campaign of the national nonprofit Share Our Strength that is committed to ensuring that every kid has 3 healthy meals a day, 365 days a year. Their dedicated New York-based team is working to end child hunger throughout the state. No Kid Hungry partners with schools, community-based organizations, and governmental agencies to launch and enhance programs providing healthy meals and expanding access to nutritious foods. Stephanie Wu Winter is the Senior Program Manager for the No Kid Hungry New York team and works to develop and execute strategies for strengthening participation in federal nutrition programs. This includes building and sustaining relationships with schools, community-based organizations, and other key stakeholders focused on increasing childhood food security across the state. Stephanie currently lives on Staten Island with her partner, kid, and a rescue cat. So welcome, Stephanie, and we'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Gabriel, and thank you, Seven Valleys Health Coalition, and you all for inviting me into this space. Just noting in that a spirit of virtual and kerfuffles is that my kid is home with a fever today. So if hopefully he knows we're in an important conversation right now, but things may happen, and I am a mom first. So I just want to say it's such, again, a privilege to be here with you today to learn, discuss food rescue, sustainability, and its role in the food systems. I'm hoping to give you a little context on the challenges of hunger and food insecurity within our wonderful state, but I know many of you are familiar with the state of hunger for our neighbors. If you could go to the next slide, actually, just we're going to move forward through a couple, actually, maybe to the one more and then one more. Great. Like many of us here today, New York is my home. I grew up here. I went to school here. I'm raising my family here. And unfortunately, hunger is hitting home in all corners of our state, from rural farmhouses to urban apartments and suburban divisions. You know, 1 in 9 New Yorkers are facing hunger this year. And that can look like a parent who skips a meal so they can provide for their children, an older adult needing to make the choice between their grocery bill or keeping the gas on. And next slide. Or it could also be the kid who shows up at school without starting the day with a healthy breakfast, who's one of those 1 in 6 kids in New York facing hunger this year. And that means thousands and thousands of kids across our state. Next slide. There is not a county in this state that does not have some measure of childhood food insecurity to address. That's a sad reflection, but is also part of what you're doing, right? Is trying to mitigate some of those effects in all of our counties across the state, part of this network that Feeding New York State is providing, and some of the issues and solutions that we're trying to solve for our children. What's not reflected here, and I wasn't able to capture it really, but it was remarkable enough for me to bring up here this morning today, is that the USDA's annual report, which measures household food insecurity, was just published at the end of last week. And while we're still reviewing that more thoroughly, the top line findings are really concerning. Nationally, food security in 2022 was higher than 2021, and particularly households with children are being hard hit. The newest data shows that stunningly 18.5%, which is nearly 1 in 5 children, are living in food insecure households. And that's a significant jump from 12.8% in 2021. And what is also particularly concerning to see the report itself call out that children who are usually shielded from disrupted eating patterns and reduced food intake actually had a statistical increase in the year over year. Next slide. But beyond the data, as you all know, there are real people and real stories here. You know, a Bronx parent who shares that they have to choose between feeding their kids and keeping the lights on at home. A Mid-Hudson educator who describes the students who are coming to school hungry and a child passing out in class. A Mohawk Valley caregiver reporting not being able to afford food, but also not qualifying for nutrition benefits. These were some of the heartbreaking stories that we found in a poll that we did of New Yorkers across the state earlier this year, where we found that 2 in 5 adults surveyed reported symptoms of food insecurity within the last month. Nearly 3/4 of New Yorkers are reporting that it's harder to afford groceries than it was a year ago. I can attest to that myself. Whenever I go to the grocery store and I look at my bill and look at what I'm bringing home, 1 in 4 parents or caregivers are saying that they're worried that they don't have enough food for their children. But we're unified behind, and I can see that in the spirit of the work that's being done today, and unified in the poll that, you know, almost everyone in the state realizes that ending child hunger should be a bipartisan issue, and we should work towards solutions to solve this. I wanted to call out a couple of also voices here, and so that if we could go to the next slide, around just, you know, in Ulster County, you know, residents sharing that how critical school lunch is for them, that they're, you know, they're not able to feed themselves, but they're reassured by knowing that their daughter is able to go to school and have access to meals. You know, that just really hits home as a parent for me, and reinforces the role that school meals and school communities have for our children within the state. Next slide. Another that really resonated me was around, you know, just working families who are struggling. You know, this is a 2-income household that is saying they're still living paycheck to paycheck, that they're still struggling, that inflation is affecting their impact to support their family, and that it's just really not sustainable for them. And this is somebody from Orleans County who reported that. So just put, you know, as we look at the data, which clearly shows that we have some concerns in our state, there's also just real people, as we all know, as we're working with these families. And it's always, I think it's always good for us to bring that home around the voices of hunger and other New Yorkers or neighbors, who they might be. If we could go to the next slide. I'm kind of speeding through because I know we're kind of like hitting a lot of time. So, and also I am a resident of New York City, in which I speak very quickly. So know that we'll have question times, and then if you all have some more questions for me, I'm happy to slow it down and answer them. But just wanting to bring up some policy situations, solutions to addressing hunger and poverty. I think the wonderful work that you all are doing around food rescue and sustainability is part of that conversation, is part of that food system and part of the solution. But here at No Kid Hungry, we really also believe that there is strength in and also supporting some of our nutrition programs, our federal nutrition programs. You know, as I talked about some of the data and the rising food insecurity, year over year. That also coincided with a lot of pandemic era programs that were created. And so during the pandemic, we were able to fund really and strengthen some of our government assistance programs, which really prevented some of that rise in hunger. But a lot of those programs have ended. So some of the emergency grocery benefits or expanded SNAP benefits, flexibilities with some of our school meals, grab and go meals over the summer, those things have now ended. And so I think there could be drawn some correlation between some of those expansions of programs and as they've ended, and some of this rise in food security. Food insecurity for some of our families. So, you know, we really think that strengthening our school meal access is a huge factor for us. We saw wonderfully in New York State in the budget that there was an expansion for budget for community eligibility provision subsidy. So many more districts around the state are now being approved and able to offer no-cost meals for their students. But there are still many students that are left out of that expansion. And so No Kid Hungry, along with Feeding New York State and many others in the room, may be part of the Healthy School Meals for All Coalition. We'd like to see New York State continue to push on and follow some of our neighbors that have now gone to no-cost meals across the state. Through summer meals, we understand, like, for our students, that's oftentimes when there is a summer slump, they're not getting that nutrition regularly. And so we saw that there was an expansion for non-congregate feeding in rural areas of the state, which we think is wonderful. No Kid Hungry worked with a number of partners last year who were expanding their programs to that. It allowed families to be able to maybe do a grab and go pickup or have meal delivery if there are transportation issues. We'd love to see New York State and programs across the state expand that. As well as there will likely be an opportunity around summer EBT. So another way to support families through maybe that missed school meal program. And we're hoping to see that roll out strongly in the state. And ultimately, we know one of the biggest programs, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, is a huge and powerful tool for ending hunger. You know, SNAP provides eligible households with that grocery benefit where they can use it at a farmer's market or a grocery store, have dignity in how they're accessing food, and help them support expansion in their grocery purchasing power. It's also a huge economic boost, a local boost. You know, these dollars are being directly related back into the economy through jobs, through wages. And in fact, SNAP provides for every SNAP dollar that households spend, it usually translates to about $1.50 to $1.80 back into the local economy. So it's a program where there's a win-win, right? We're supporting our families with a little extra boost. We're supporting our local economies as well. And then a program, as my child is now aged out of this very special population, is our WIC program. So the Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, which helps support pregnant people, postpartum women, infants and children up to the age of 5, with not only food, but also nutrition education. That's a program that is wonderfully is a wonderful support for families. We find oftentimes just that there are some administrative burdens around this program. We'd like to see some of those burdens lowered, as well as just families really realizing that what we have historically seen is that families, once their children age at like a turn one, that they will drop from the program and not recognize that there's still a lot of opportunity for families up until the age of 5 to participate in WIC as well as SNAP. And so also, ultimately, at the end of this, when it comes to hunger and poverty in New York, is we understand it's economic mobility for families that will be the driver in ending hunger. And so we'd like to continue seeing families and New Yorkers supported with economic mobility programs like the expanded child tax credit, which really helped reduce child poverty. Opportunities for families to connect to greater financial mobility are also programs that we'd like to see as policy solutions for addressing hunger and poverty. Next slide. I know we're very quick, so I will just kind of give a very brief overview, and you can look more, reach out to me separately around what we do and potential partnership opportunities. But as mentioned, No Kid Hungry New York is a campaign of Share a Strength. We do work with organizations across the state in trying to strengthen families and kids and access. We do that through advocacy, awareness building, technical assistance, partnership, and strategic grant making. And so these are all some different ways that we'd love to talk to you all more as they dovetail and intersect with the work that we do and the work that you are all doing today. Hopefully I've given us enough time for some questions with my quick, speedy voice.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. And I just want to put anybody that's in the room a little bit at rest as we can go into our networking breakout sessions that are sort of coming up next a little bit late. That's sort of a flexible time for us. So if there's good questions that pop up, don't worry about that at all. We can run it a little bit late on that end if that is helpful. All right, so we are ready to sort of open the floor for question time. We ask that you please use the raise hand icon if you have a question. You can find that, I think, down in your reactions. There's a little reactions button down there, so we can call on you to unmute, or you can pop them in the chat box, and Avery's going to help me sort of go through. I saw that we did already have some questions in there for Stephanie, but also for Jay and Christine as well. And so, let me change my view just so I can see if people, all right, I don't see any hands at the moment. So Avery, why don't you feel free to unmute yourself and read off some of the questions that you're seeing in there.
Yeah, so the first question is for Christine. Can you clarify the amount of pounds per week a business has to generate for the law to kick in? There was some confusion around, is it 2 tons or 2,000 pounds?
Yeah, so it's 2 tons, which would be 4,000 pounds per week.
Thank you. The next question in the chat could be for Jay or Christine. How can organizations get on the list to be connected with businesses for food recovery efforts?
Yeah, Jay, do you want to take this one?
So how can they get on? So I think the best way to do this, if they're not already on the list, the designated food scrap generator list, that's fine.
Oh,
I think
they mean like if there's a local feeding program, emergency food relief organization that wants to assist a business. How can they? I mean, I guess there's no real list of
I gotcha. Okay,
feeding programs that we publish. So I would say if they're working with their food bank, that kind of that angle, Jay.
Yeah. So if they're, thank you, Christine. So I think the best thing for them to do is if they're not already working with one of the 10 regional food banks in their area, is to reach out to them and see if they can become a member, and then they can set them up probably with some donor pickups. They can also reach out to me directly, and I can point them in the right direction and help them as much as I can. Feel free to just email me, and I'll put my email and contact number in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me as well, and I can make sure I guide you in the right direction.
Thanks, Jay. That line of conversation seems to be kind of a common theme coming up in the chat. So is there any work being done to connect folks who are not affiliated with a food bank at all, to get more grassroots organizations involved in this? Because it seems like there's a ton of food out there, and there's a ton of other organizations, doing similar work that could help fill those gaps.
So great questions. So because we are a member of Feeding America and our food banks are a member of us, the state association, we, continually partner with our agencies with the food banks. And we don't do that just because we're, trying to keep the food with the agencies that are affiliated with the food bank. It's really because a lot of our larger corporate organizations are concerned with food safety. And so the food banks provide at no cost to any of their partner agencies, pantries, food rescue organizations, shelters. They provide food safety training to these member agencies. That way the donor is comfortable with them doing pickups. That's the reason a lot of the donors want to stay within the food bank network, is because of the food safety aspect of it.
Thank you, Jay. Kate, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, hi. This sort of piggybacks on that question that was in the chat. If New York State is trying to expand and grow this program, like Christine alluded to, is there a way to sort of decentralize the food rescue work and make space for these smaller grassroots organizations like food rescues that aren't affiliated with food banks?
I can kick it off. Oh,
Go ahead.
You want to go, Jay?
Oh, you're good. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, at the state level, you know, we are not discriminatory in who can work with who, and at any level. So yeah, if there was a smaller organization that is potentially, or medium size, whatever size they are, if they're outside and they're not a member agency of their food bank, they, in our eyes, completely have the capabilities to work with any businesses that are required to comply with this law. There's nothing in from the law that is stopping them from doing that. And our funding that we've provided for these entities also does not limit folks who are member agency of food banks. So, and then I guess, Jay, I can let you comment on kind of how that plays out in reality with your work.
Yeah, I was just gonna, comment and say that, the DEC list that's it's publicized. You guys can all access that. If you want to reach out to a donor, I would say a lot of the donors that are on there, specifically the donors that wholesalers, distributors, if they don't, even if they do have a relationship with the food bank, at the end of the day, it's up to the donor, what they want to do, and if they do want to work with you. So, if you can show them that you have this, the training that you need, the safety training, and that you can reassure them that you guys will operate within the food safety guidelines, I think you have a better shot of working with them. But to Christine's point, right, the list is public. You guys can reach out to the donors at your leisure. The only thing I would say is, if it's just a lot easier for me to help you and the food banks to assist you and send donations your way if you're a part of the food bank. But I get why some of you don't want to be members of the food bank. So that's completely up to you.
I don't know if it's appropriate, but I'm going to jump in here with a question. And actually, this question is for Stephanie. First, thank you so much to everybody that presented so far. So I'm thinking of, I think we've all during COVID and pandemic time have been touched about what's happening in our schools with our kiddos. And so my question is there any way that you've seen sort of these grassroots food rescue programs, or maybe something that's not quite affiliated with the food bank, doing neat things around connecting with schools and providing some extra assistance for beyond sort of the meals that are there and provided at school?
I think there's a huge great question. Thank you for that. I think there's actually a huge opportunity there. So often I'm speaking to schools and school districts who are trying to sustain their pantries that they've started through the pandemic. I think that just really highlighted for schools kind of a role that they're playing for families. And so I think perhaps maybe for some of our smaller, I'm hearing some, and this is by no means my area of expertise. But, I think some of the challenges for a school pantry is just like the volume of distribution that they're doing, right? They're only specifically serving kind of their school community and maybe the surrounding area, which may not be the right partnership for a larger food bank. although I have seen some partnerships happen as well between that. But perhaps like a smaller food rescue, partnering with their schools, talking to them about if they have a pantry, would there be an interest in pivoting some of that food through those efforts? I see my colleague Stephen on the line from New York City DOE. I don't know if you have any thoughts on a larger scale of how that might work, but I'm thinking particularly for some of our smaller organizations and our smaller districts, where that partnership might be a good fit.
Happy to chime in. Hello, everyone. Stephen O'Brien from Office of Food and Nutrition Services, New York City Public Schools. We're very engaged in making sure that we're both minimizing waste, but also rescuing food that can be used. Some simple, super hyper local things that happen is there is a share table process that the USDA encourages for all school districts across the country. So during the school meal program, at the end of each period, if there's leftover food, it can be put onto a share table for other students to partake if they're hungry beyond the regular meal. Also, many schools in the state of New York qualify for after-school snacks and supper programs. That's a great way to provide some more food security to the community after the school day. And finally, it's a little premature, but just like us in New York City, we're working on trying to create a link between the school community and the nearby pantries and or families very hyper local within the school that need food, and possibly taking the food from the share table and creating a community refrigerator and or local pantry donation model. Obviously, our program is here to provide service for breakfast and lunch, but we are trying to make sure that food is going into the bellies of people that need it. And so hopefully stay tuned and keep an eye out for New York City. In the next few weeks, we are creating an opportunity for school principals to opt into a program where they could connect with the people that need the food the most and save the food from the shared table at the end of each period into a shared refrigerator, and then donate that either to families directly or to donate it to a nearby pantry. So that took us, just to be clear with this community, when you do engage with your organizations like school districts and others, be prepared for it to take quite a while for this kind of thing to come around. We're aware of all the laws that have changed, and we have a local law that requires a food waste plan. And this took us about 18 months to get off the ground. We're just in the final weeks of launching it, so you're getting some inside baseball. And that's why I posted the note about the community refrigerators as a question, because I do think that it would be interesting if food banks could help to support community refrigerator models to lighten the load of the pickups in order to allow for those pickups to go to the areas that need it the most. Just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that insight, and we appreciate your perseverance. Let's do one more question. If you have a question you want to raise here, use the little raise hand button there. Or Avery, do you see anything in the chat box you want to highlight sort of for our last question?
If there's no one raising their hand, I believe this question was for Jay. What's the methodology for tracking pounds recovered? How do you estimate those? And if you can talk a little bit about that.
So the methodology for tracking the pounds that we're recovering, it's pretty simple. So what they're doing is, the food bank or the food pantry that's doing the pickups, when the food gets back to the location, they're using their digital scale and they're weighing the food by category. So dairy, produce, frozen, and they're weighing it by category, and then they're just entering it into the Meal Connect app. And that when they enter it into the app, whether it's at the food bank or the pantry, it goes right into the program online, and it makes it real easy for them to track the pounds. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much to Stephanie and to Christine and to Jay. We really appreciate your insight and for you showing up today. And Stephanie, we have healthy wishes for your little one. Thank you so much for being here despite that.
Hey,
Yes.
Can you pull me back up really quick?
Yeah, we can do that. Anna, can we spotlight Jay real quick?
I promise 2 seconds. So guys, we have our slogan at Feeding New York State is don't chuck it, truck it. So what I'm gonna do is when this is over, I'll get in contact with Gabe, and if you registered for this, we're gonna send some shirts out. We'll randomly draw like 5 people that registered or so, maybe a little more, and we'll email you and get your address and send you guys a shirt.
Thank you, Jay. I didn't even know there's going to be a conference swag today, so we greatly appreciate that.